All right, my name is Rich Schmidt. We're here with Randall Coats. It's July 24th, 2025. We're at Laurelhurst Park in Portland. Randall, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
First question to get things started is why wine?
Ooh, why wine? That's actually a bigger question than maybe supposed to be listed. When I initially got into wine, I don't feel like I had a set direction on where I wanted to go with anything, especially professionally. And so I was in a place where learning about at least an intense by the glass list would help me pay my rent in first the Bronx, New York, and then Brooklyn, New York, and afford to live in New York City. But initially, I thought the conjecture about wine was not for me, not for a black man from Detroit. And so when I would hear certain terms, i.e. fruit forward, or even descriptors, like jasmine or lavender, I'm like, well, those things aren't really descriptors for, something that's not a person or a smell. So this is not real. And I doubled down on that. But then I had my own aha moment, and I realized how impactful wine has been in, human society globally for the past millennia plus, as I've learned. But just really in the establishment and formation of America, and the flourishment of big business. I was like, oh, the bosses, all the big bosses, they are sipping $2,000 bottles. They're not, going to the liquor store. Which there was a point where I aspired to be mature enough to have relax Riesling, on my shelf, but just be able to regularly afford a liquor bottle that's more than $50. And so, wine in a very short time expanded, my worldview.
So let's talk about life before wine a little bit. You mentioned growing up in Detroit. Tell me about kind of early life and where you were headed.
So I grew up in the hood in Detroit, and I didn't see much opportunity outside of what had become the traditional pathways, sports, entertainment. I did pretty well in school. Was an excellent test taker and took advantage of, the testing system, to get into not only higher learning institutions, but also, there was tests taken to get into high school, to get time off and to get teachers off your back. And so, but my mother, she's retiring. She's retiring shortly from being a school teacher. She was a DPS, Detroit Public Schools teacher. She instilled the value of education. And so I knew that I could use that as a way out. Once I figured out that I wasn't going to be 6 feet tall or any taller than that, took my NBA dreams away. Didn't want to get hit too many times and, suffer the way I felt. And, as a Barry Sanders fan, he retired, around the age of 30. And so I was like, football, that isn't a long-term thing either. And the streets, I felt like I had been raised to have the respect for my family to not take that route. I've been raised with enough support to not take that route. So, school was the focus. But I didn't really have interest in institutions of higher learning, as it came to be in the early 2000s, where requirements and expenses, were just the total name of the game, regardless of what you saw or your personal ambitions, and so by the time I was in my mid-20s, I kind of taken myself away from school. I had my first serving job, and the service industry is what led me to wine. My first urban job was at Steak and Shake, and interestingly enough, I still use the principles and the steps of service I learned there to this day. Not giving Steak and Shake any more credit than is necessary, but I think the experience itself is what brought me to the point where I was able to move around and move forward in service and learn how to focus on certain specialties. So yeah, coming back to moving to New York, I work at City Winery. My grandmother, who I'll talk about a little later, she got me the job there due to a personal connection. She's in the music business, and her and the owner of that establishment are, close friends, especially professionally. And yeah, I got there and was like, all right, I got to learn this, to get sections, to get the good sections, to get the good schedule, to make money, to pay rent. So I'll take it. And, leads me to the aha moment where my worldview shifted. I was like, oh, shit, there's a lot to this wine thing. And I guess what sealed the deal ultimately was realizing the wine world was a world that I felt I had been excluded from because of what I look like, who I am, where I'm from. And if I could change that, then there's someone that could, a generation later can come and not have to be accepted up front, but also not have to deal with the pitfalls and the things that I had to avoid to even get here. Reach one, teach one. That mindset kind of developed early. And then what kept me in it, and I saw it shortly after, which is why I'm saying what kept me in it, was the inclusion, like the community that immediately welcomed me. I was fortunate at City Winery to be around a large group of mentors who actually cared and actually accepted me and showed me that there is a lot more diversity. I was hired by a Puerto Rican woman who wanted to make sure that the space was as diverse and exclusive that, and this is a Jewish-owned space, which Jewish and black culture, Jewish and black culture, definitely have enjoyed or have shown a synergy, throughout recent American history, especially the proliferation of the industrial age, but let me say this as careful as I can. Because of how things are, not everyone gets to see the connections. Not everyone gets to experience the connections. Not everyone gets to appreciate the connections from both sides. So I was in this space that promoted diversity and that had someone who I didn't expect to be passionate about wine leading, this group of people, from all walks of life, into appreciating the wine world, and appreciating the space for what it was. And so I was like, I can do this. The door's open for me, I can keep that door open for whoever else wants to follow me through it. And yeah, was it 13 years later, 12 years later, here we are.
That's amazing. So, you mentioned obviously the city winery came because of a connection. Tell me about what you expected when you got there, and what were the biggest sort of obstacles or learning moments for you early on there?
I didn't expect much. I was my father passed the year before, and he and I were very close and had developed an even the closest relationship we had in my adult life. Just a year or two before he passed, and so I went through a moment of depression, and really just like being low down in life because he passed. He was 48 years old, and so I saw that, okay, maybe there's not as much hope as I was led to believe, but in my depression, a lot of things, I kind of had a spiral, but it brought me to a moment of clarity where I was like, okay, I need to leave Detroit. I can't spread my wings and really move the way I want to move in life. If I stay here, as I am. And so the opportunity to move to New York and, get this job that was set to be stable because of that connection. Hey, nepotism ain't always a bad thing. That's all. I just expected to be able to reset and move forward with my life. I visited New York twice, and even before the big move, like 6 months prior, I saw myself being able to move around in New York in a way that was comfortable. But I didn't have long-term goals or expectations for living in New York. And I got there, and what happened was, the whole game changed. I saw money, I saw people with money, and how to maintain money in a way that I'd never seen before. I saw a place that was on the world stage and had built a reputation of being on the world stage, and I was forced to learn how to operate in that place. And so the beginning was rough. Like, there's a lot of pride being a Detroiter. Detroit, especially when I was growing up, was close to 90% black. And so it was news to me that black people were the minority in this country. I went to the University of Missouri my freshman year, and so I had an awakening at that point. But, after that freshman year, came back to Detroit to be more comfortable. But the pride that I had, it kind of helped, it made me box myself in, and I had to learn how to adapt to a new place so I can flourish, and I had to learn how to reconcile, the pride and what built that pride with being able to move forward in a place that offered bigger and better opportunities for me personally. And so the first 9 months there was literally gestation. I had to be a new embryo and grow, and be reborn into this person that's ready for the world. And I still didn't put too many expectations on New York, but there was a period where myself as I knew had to be broken down and built back up better. And it was already broken down enough for me to be open to it, but I had to be broken down further to really strip all the bullshit that wasn't serving me anymore away, and really be ready to move into where I need to be in life.
That's pretty deep for hitting a new job and having to get through that. Tell me about the work and what you were asked to do, and I guess what you thought about your first step into that world.
So I was somewhat underqualified to be there. I was fortunate that I've been told I have a glowing personality, and that's really the number one thing you need to move forward and progress and move up in hospitality is having a great personality and being able to connect with people. And so I had to learn efficiency. I had to learn, and efficiency really focusing on speed. But the standards were so high there that the speed was an absolute requirement, and a huge expectation was to be actually good at it. And that furthered me being broken down. Like, there was a point where I was not getting the shifts I wanted. I was sometimes only getting a day and a half a week, and that half day was an on-call brunch shift where you make no money. And it got to a point where I wasn't making enough money, even with the support I had to pay rent and still be comfortable. And I was living in a room in the Bronx, about a mile up from Yankee Stadium, which is not the fun Bronx. The fun Bronx is like 161st is Yankee Stadium, 162nd, 163rd, 164th, it immediately turns back to the Bronx. And all that fairy tale shit is gone. You are in the Bronx. And mind you, the Bronx is the only borough that has the in front of it. Like, i.e. the jungle, the zoo, And so I wanted more. I've always wanted as much as I can for my life, and always had that ambition, just didn't have the direction, didn't even have the self-belief And it came from a moment of using survival tactics that I had learned from where I was from to actually put myself in a better position. So I applied to a Red Lobster in Harlem. They had just built a new Red Lobster that closed a few years later next to the Apollo. And so I'm like, perfect. You know, I'll be with my people, and I'll be, you know, more in a space that's more comfortable and more at my level. And because of said connection, you know, they were like, oh, we can't lose this guy and this go over well with the powers that be. That, you know, my immediate superiors, I'm guessing that's what they were thinking, because after I had that interview and it went well, I was immediately scheduled for, like, you know, full-time shifts, had better sections. But I had also worked my way, you know, into it. And so, but still I was thrust into this because I definitely didn't have the know-how that I have now. But being put under that pressure and put directly into the madness, into the fire, I stepped up and I never looked back. And so that, you know, was one of the biggest teachers and one of the biggest motivators to this day, was that, okay, if I'm put in a position where I have to step up, I will, and I never look back after being put in that position. And so after that 9 months, I was, you know, what I felt was the man there. You know, I was used to having a full schedule. My standard was getting, you know, the best sections, and in there I was making the money that I needed to make to live in New York more comfortably and actually enjoy it. And so 2013 going into 2014 was like two different worlds. You know, in 2014, I had the realization that, oh, I'm making it in New York. They say if you can make it here, you can make it anywhere. So from that point, I wanted to test the theory. And not too long after having that thought, I met my ex-wife, who was from Norway. And she was finishing school at Long Island University. No specific shout out to them. It was just, you know, to give details for the story. She was finishing her bachelor's there, but had plans to move back to Norway, and we hit it off well enough. And I felt like, okay, this is coinciding with me having that thought. So the universe has lined all this up. Needs to go from there, and I went. And that experience that I've had, and I feel like, and I'm even just making this realization, I feel like, you know, part for the course of my life, being thrust into positions that I may not be ready for, and having to step up and not looking back, you know, and in new arenas that were totally unfamiliar, you know, totally unfamiliar. And so I get there, don't know the language, never, I visited Europe with that plan in mind already. I went to Paris a few months before then for the first time. But I studied, you know, French from middle school to college just to, you know, get the credits I needed to pass the grade, but didn't have a thirst for learning French or or being immersed in the culture, you know, whereas Norway was not even on my radar. You know, I was very ignorant to, you know, that life and that country, you know, and that culture. But she gave me a crash course. I met her parents, you know, and a conversation I had with her stepfather really emboldened me to move there and flourish. I mean, of course, the love thing, you know, that was there, but love is a fleeting emotion. Love is a fleeting emotion. And so what I needed was something concrete to match up with what I felt on the inside to move forward. And I invited her parents to City Winery to see me in action, to see where I worked and you know, the family that I was leaving, because the people that I worked there with, and that was another part of City Winery, the people I worked there with, the mentors and my coworkers, colleagues, they have all become family, and they cared for me as family did in New York, and I grew to care for them as family does. And so I wanted them to see that, to see where I'm coming from and, you know, how I'm cut, essentially. But what happened was, this vote of confidence from her stepfather, that he was like, hey, a place like this would be awesome in the town that we're from, and there's plenty of money, you know, and he was a photographer for the Navy. So he took a picture of all the naval cadets that, passed the training school. And so he was very well connected, and his father and their family, were well known and connected in that town. And so I was like, all right, if you believe in this and are willing to lend the necessary support, I'm super down. And, I get there and...
What year did you get there?
I got there in 2015, July 2015. Of course, I couldn't work initially, even though we were married. There's the whole immigration, getting the green card, getting citizenship, blah, blah, blah. And so it took 9 months to be able to work. And, I had to be supported in a way I'd never been supported before. But I kept my ears to the streets and, stayed as close to the wine world as possible. And I went to actually another incubator program. And this was just the pitch for it to, get interest. And they were inviting expats, to help them start businesses there because the town, bolstered by oil money, because Norwegian, or Norway rather, has oil. And that is what makes Norway one of the happiest countries and one of the most prosperous countries, in the past 20, 30 years. And so this specific city was it was the oil capital. A lot of American businesses were there. A lot of national interests were in that city. And so they wanted to be able to accommodate everyone that came. There was literally an American school where they had American teachers teaching all the kids American culture, American English, because most people learn United Kingdom English, which is vastly different in its own way. I mean, it's still the same language, but, different.
Barely.
Yeah, right. And so I met an English gentleman who connected me with a Norwegian gentleman who wanted to open a cafe and wine bar as his retirement from corporate America as a salesperson for one of the, tertiary suppliers of the oil industry. And there I was able to create my first wine list and become a buyer for the first time. I also obtained my WSET 2, and what I guess was serendipitous was that my WSET 2 instructor was also my main distributor. And so, there were advantages on both sides. Lots of hands-on training. He actually delivered my books to my house because my house was less than 10 minutes away from his office. And so that built even further on the foundation that had already been laid at City Winery. And after I got my certification, WSET level 2 with merit, there was no looking back from there. And what's the old saying that I can't think of, even though I usually can think of? The possibilities were endless. The possibilities were endless, and the sky was literally the limit. And so we opened this place. Started out with a lot of success, even though new places always have their own individual challenges. Unfortunately, part of opening a new space is requiring a certain level from your partner as support, and we weren't in the place for that support to be. And so we ended our relationship and marriage. But I made sure I kept the door open at City Winery and there were no bridges burnt in New York. And so I did two things while there in Norway, keeping that relationship open. The first time I visited the States, I went to City Winery. I talked to the numbers 1, 2, and 3 working there, just for advice in opening a new space and creating success in that new space. But they respected my, gumption, and also thinking in reaching out to them, as opposed to emailing or sending a message. I made sure to get time with them and fit that in a very, very busy 2 weeks of visiting the States after 16 months of not seeing the States. And I think that garnered a level of respect that kept my name good there. Also, I have reached out to Andre Mack of Maison Noir Wines, and I learned about him from one of my first mentors, another black man from the Bronx. You know, when I found out about OPP, I questioned it because I'm like, you know, yeah, it sounds nice, and I know you'll get the hood into it. You know, like that's a classic. That is definitely a classic, you know, for the culture. But then I learned about his background, which kind of helped me understand his reasoning. And I was like, oh, he's serious. I need to know this man and get close to him. And so I reached out to him. I found out that he was visiting Scandinavia because he had new placements in Sweden as well as Norway, but Oslo. You know, I was on the west side of the country in the fourth largest city, fourth to Oslo's first, you know, and so I was like, well, hey, you're in the neighborhood, if you can make time, you know, it's a quick-ish trip. If you can make time to get over here, I can definitely make time to have a good event for you. But he saw that and it kept me on his radar. And so when I returned to New York, back to City Winery, I let him know. And he ended up reaching out to me out of the blue months later, almost a year later. No, he reached out to me out of the blue months later to set up time for months after that to have a real conversation about a project he was working on. And so after all that time passed, he reached out to me. It was my self-care day off, and I was already in party mode. But he called me like, hey, I'm gonna call you in an hour. I'm gonna call you in an hour. Do you have an hour to talk, you know, in that hour? I'm like, yeah, even though I wasn't ready. And when he called me back in that hour, he explained to me the and Sons concept. I'm not sure if you're familiar, but he opened what was labeled as a ham bar in Brooklyn, but the wine focus was all domestic, all vintage. So you could get bottles from the 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, you know, to current in this small 20-seat place. And they had all domestic cheese and charcuterie, but in European styles. And so it was one of the most well-developed, legendary concepts I had ever come across. And so I was like, keep me in the loop. I figured my time at City Winery had just about run its course. And so I really just stayed in touch with him and ended up working with him at his wine shop. Then January 2020, go live with the wine bar. And obviously March 2020, everything closed. But that made me realize that I needed to build my own name. And I had such a great start, such a great foundation, such great connections that I can believe in that. And I moved back to Detroit with all the consideration, with everything that had stopped in New York and everything I had lost. I figured I'd rather be back home. And Detroit had progressed in the hospitality space in a way that I felt comfortable and was to my liking, and I could see opportunity. One of that 1, 2, 3 that I spoke with, he had moved back to Detroit as he was from Metro Detroit, and he was developing his own Alpine cuisine concept. So I'm like, hey, I'm moving back to a job. Trying to open a restaurant space on the heels of lockdown ending was virtually impossible. So the timing didn't line up for that to work out. But I was able to enjoy with my newfound skills and abilities as a true hospitality person. I was able to work in some of the premier spaces in Detroit that were wine focused. Freya, it's like a chef's tasting menu restaurant that was a spinoff from Chartreuse, which is a Chartreuse bar. And if you've never known about Detroit bar culture and history, green Chartreuse is one of the main ingredients for the Last Word cocktail, which was developed at the Detroit Athletic Club during Prohibition. And so I was like, okay, this is a real place. The owner, Sandy, Andre was one of the first owners I worked the Norway, though inexperienced, I got a chance to work directly with an owner for the first time, and that changed my viewpoint of working in hospitality spaces, and that created a trend where I continued working with ownership, and so there I was able to stay focused, but also network myself and kind of have a name where I could step into spaces. And so I built my name in Detroit in a way, even in a bigger way than I built my name in New York. I was doing events in New York and enjoying events, getting the passes, getting on the list. But in Detroit, I was able to actually be, get the red carpet treatment, be, a featured guest, be a bigger fish in a small pond. And that showed me, that gave me more confidence in my own name. And so in 2021, I started my consulting business, which is Wine for the People. Wine for the People, its story started in 2019 after I left City Winery and building, trying to build my own name, working with Andre. Started as a podcast, and inspired and paying homage to the late, great Nipsey Hussle. My Leo brother, his birthday's 2 days after mine, literally. I'm August 13th, 85, he's August 15th, 85. And yeah, I felt like he was going too soon for the wrong reasons, but I really loved his message, and the movement that he had started. And so I wanted to do my part in my capacity to keep that going. And so I started this podcast, which is still available on Apple Podcasts. But the concept was, I purchase a bottle of wine, and then I make music to it and describe that bottle of wine in the language I developed for myself to the track I created. I learned that I am not as good at podcasting as I am in all things hospitality. And so I really didn't find myself being able to dedicate the time and focus that I needed to make it a good product. And I take a lot of pride in the things that I do. I don't set out to do things if I don't feel like I'll be good at it. With becoming busier, with opening a new space, and then the fallout from COVID, I didn't want to refocus on that. However, the fallout from COVID and that great reckoning with how exclusive to anybody that wasn't a white male, that in the wine industry, that helped boost my name in its own way. I didn't have to focus on the podcast anymore. And it helped create connections with people across the globe, but especially bigger names in the country. Shout out to Julia Coney. She put my name up in the rafters when I didn't think that, I was gonna be able to make those connections outside of doing the work myself. But this was based on past work, and that was the first time somebody that looked like me had seen me, somebody consequential that looked like me had seen me and put my name up like that. Second time, actually, shout out to Tahira Habibi of the Hue Society, because in 2019, she gave me, I did my first wine presentation in a very large crowd, at her Black Wine Experience, which is now known as Wine and Culture Fest. It was in New Orleans at the time. Now it was in Atlanta. Now it's in DC. But yeah, those opportunities and being recognized by people that look like me helped me really believe, because that's really what it takes. You need to be recognized by your own community to feel like you've made it. Like, I don't care what anybody else says. If you say you don't need your community, you still mad about stuff and you still haven't forgiven those you need to forgive, because where you come from is what builds you, good or bad. And yes, you absolutely have to see the rest of the world and unlearn the limitations that your community, being from your whatever community imposes upon you. But that recognition is like none other. And, you know, if you don't want to identify with the community that recognizes you, you can be infamous. If you do, you can be famous. You know, and I feel like ultimately you have to vacillate between the two anyway to make impact. And so, you know, coming back to 2021 with all those things having had happened, I felt the confidence to start my own consulting business where education was the focus, and education was by way of training staff, you know, being a buyer for establishments, as well as being a buyer for personal collections, and then lastly doing education-focused events. My events have always been focused on education, you know, because especially when it's for a non-traditional group, I want them to feel empowered as I feel to step into wine spaces where it might just be them, but be confident and have the knowledge to have the experience that they are looking to have, that they are spending money to have. These wine experiences are not cheap. You know, nice, you know, artisanal level wine bottle, you know, goes for at least 20 bucks. Yeah, you can find, especially from, you know, certain New World or Southern Old World, i.e. Spain and Portugal countries, good value for money, but you got to know how to find it. You know, you need confidence, you need knowledge, you know, and that experience is going to build passion, you know. And backtrack one more time, I guess the initial nail in the coffin, the final nail was seeing how it impacted the world. The initial nail was the aha moment where I tasted, it was Malbec that was served on tap from Mendoza, Argentina. Didn't even realize that, you know, of course, my thinking that time was France, Italy, Napa for good wine. I take a sip of this, and it had been after a long day of work, and I was just like, let me just relax over a glass of wine. Let me see, you know, what all the fuss is about, if what I feel like are rumors and myths are true. I took a sip, and I looked at it, and I was like, oh, so this is what Jesus turned water into. Okay. And that was my first selling point to wine, you know, and mind you, I'm working in this Jewish-owned establishment where the viewpoint of Jesus is different from, you know, pretty much everyone else, but namely, you know, those with the traditional Christian beliefs, which is the majority of our country. And I was just like, hey, you want to have what Jesus turned water into? And I said it with passion and conviction. And they were like, you know what? I'll try that. And so I would have my whole section drinking Malbec. And I think they didn't, you know, Malbec is a very easy, you know, red wine to drink. So, and when I say easy, inoffensive, you know, welcoming in its own way. And so it was easy to, you know, convey what I came to learn. But the bigger lesson was you don't need to know everything. You just need to have passion and really express your belief and your joy in the product. That's how you sell. All the knowledge, that just helps you sell in fewer words and with less expression, you know. And so that propelled me, and that principle carried me to the point where I was like, I can build my own name, teaching and, you know, educating people to really find what wine makes them passionate about wine, and, you know, better ways. And when I say better, not more, but just more in the sense of more authentic ways to express their joy in the product. And so back to 2021, you know, started it, and, you know, that was my first business venture as an entrepreneur. And so I had to take my licks, you know, learn that all money isn't good money, and that all promises won't be kept, and that you can't make too many promises and keep them as well. And so that was a learning experience. You know, I remember taking, you know, my birthday is coming up, and I took August off because I had enough prospects, and I felt like I was close enough to seal the deal, and I had saved enough money where I could just take a month off and let everything fall where it did. Also take a week-plus long trip to California and Mexico's wine country. And foot most of that bill and pay rent. And nope, that wasn't the case. And so that's where, I got to Michael Simon's roast. Michael Simon, famous chef, he had his kind of meat forward concept in Detroit, and the connection got me there, and then that actually closed abruptly, but I was kind of looking for my way out, and I was working on my WSET 3, and so another connection got me to Freya. But while there, I learned that I'm not as into food as I'm into wine. And so I wanted to focus on my business and focus on the wine there, but my knowledge of food and the pairings that are required to create a good wine list would carry me, throughout restaurant spaces in the city. And once again, feeling and seeing that I was more of that big fish, in a smaller pond compared to New York. I was throwing my weight around and just walking up to people, hey, I'm Randall, I do wine, I'm serious, but I'm also a native Detroiter with a lot of passion from Detroit, and I feel like a good representation of Detroit culture. So you need to work with me. And that finally landed at a Black-owned space whose food focus was elevated soul food. Like really artisanal level where, it was that balance of texture and flavor. So yeah, you can get oxtail, but it's gonna have the nice crunchy bits. It's also gonna have the accoutrement that balance out the whole experience. And so this place, Savannah Blue, downtown Detroit, still open. They entertain my bullshit, I'll say. I was able to go up to them with that confidence, and it started with just me not having the beverage experience I wanted. There was a wine bottle that I looked at, people that work behind bars are always looking behind the bar, looking at stuff that has dust on it, like, ooh, I want that. What's that? Let me taste that, So I saw a bottle of Michigan sparkling Riesling, and Michigan has storied wine country, over a century old. While Europe still owned the West Coast in the mid 1800s, Michigan was one of, trailing behind New York, was one of the burgeoning, wine regions that was domestic focused, U.S. produced and U.S. focused. And so you have this Riesling, Riesling is obviously a German varietal or has enjoyed the most success coming from Germany. But I met those producers. I really wanted that, and how, I just wanted the glass because I was just by myself and really in for a quick lunch, but I was willing to buy the bottle, because it was like, okay, you want to pour me a glass? I'll buy the bottle, take it home with me, but I want a glass of that here today. And there was this whole back and forth where the bar manager who was there at the time had to call the owners, because they were involved with the buying process and approval of the list. And so couldn't sell it to me. And I was like, well, that doesn't make sense. I know that producer, I can tell you about it, and I'm willing to spend money on it. I'm even willing to get you, I'm willing to spend the restaurant price, which is way more than the bottle is worth, And I'm like, you're not gonna take my money? Like, that doesn't make sense. And so I explained what I did to them, and they, were my first and only clients in the restaurant space. Actually with consulting period, I've advised, and I've advised for events and in other spaces, but they were my only client. And my consultancy was 10 weeks, 9 or 10 weeks, where I trained staff, revamped their whole list, and gave them buying principles to use going forward. In the midst of that, this lovely opportunity for a harvest internship in Napa at Robert Craig Winery. It's a mountain winery. Howell Mountain is where the estate is. But that fell into my lap, literally. A friend of mine in the industry, Mary Mamed, she's yeah, she's a big name, you know, especially in the name of inclusivity. She made a random Instagram story post like, hey, who wants to do an art harvest internship in Napa? Me. And she passed my info on, phone call was made, and literally over the course of the week, over the course of a week, I received my first and only, at this point, harvest internship there. And so a few months later, weeks after the consultancy ended, from that point, I drove out to Napa from Detroit by myself. But you know, pretty much everything, I had in my car. I was in a relationship at the time, and the relationship didn't survive that. But I got one of the best opportunities you can find in a harvest internship, where I was a part of a very small team. Me, one more intern, the winemaker, the enologist, and a part-time, cellar person. We harvested and processed, I think, 120 tons, mostly cab, but all the heavy reds, but definitely in that, you know, leaning more towards old world style, where it's about the dryness and depth, not so much the bombastic qualities that I feel like Napa has been come to be known for. No shade, you know, because I also got to visit the pioneering properties that created Napa, you know, Beckstoffer, Tokalone, learn from, you know, and rub shoulders with some of the Mondavi disciples, or the descendants of the Mondavi disciples, you know, and the current operators and proliferators of the expensive Napa that we know and love or hate, depending on who you ask. But we know it. We know it for sure. And that experience, I felt like it opened my eyes to production in a way I'd never seen before. You know, I'd enjoyed pretty much the psalm world and the educator world. And, you know, I'd always been advised against production, especially once I started wearing a suit, you know, and getting checks with commas for doing, you know, minimal work. I was like, oh, yeah, that production thing, you got to get dirty, you got to sweat, you got to be sore, and you got to work more than 40 hours a week for minimum wage. Oh, no. But this helped me really close the circle of what I learned. And I was like, well, what I do is I educate from a storytelling standpoint. And usually it's my conjecture from book, you know, learning about what, you know, how it gets to your glass. But now I get to see it from the ground to your glass. All right, I can use this. And once again, I was thrust into an environment where I had nothing but excellent teachers, and it gave me a very strong foundation to move forward. And so I moved back to Detroit after an internship because I didn't like California living, and where I live, Joe Montana was one of my neighbors. Like, I've never seen a place that's so expensive. At one point, gas was $8 a gallon, you know, and I had to choose between putting the gas in my car to go to the grocery store, or just having the noodles that I stockpiled and not leaving the property, because we stayed on the property, and the property was, you know, a trip down the mountain that was at least 20 minutes around, you know, both ways to the nearest grocery store. Walmart was an hour away in the city of Napa, you know, or 45 minutes away in Santa Rosa, you know, and so, yeah. I couldn't continue that life and be comfortable, you know, and enjoy the things that I come to enjoy. And so I took that trek back to Detroit by myself, another road trip, which was its own learning and growth experience. And something I'm eternally proud of myself for doing, because I never heard anybody doing that before. And, you know, there were dangers that were apparent. Not like the dangers of living in wine country. You know, I had a scorpion in my room the first few days I was there, and I literally put all my stuff, you know, in the living room, and I hadn't fully unpacked my car, and I had to sit there and think like, okay, do I want to move forward with this? Because this is now dangerous, actually dangerous. It's not about paying bills and being able to, take care of myself. It's like, oh, there's rattlesnakes here, there's bears, there's mountain lions, a scorpion that's found its way in my room, and other things I've never heard of that could possibly kill me, not to mention the very dangerous equipment and chemicals that are required for that level of winemaking. And I decided, yes, I do want to keep doing this. I killed that scorpion in a famous way. There's an archive 30-minute video of the process of killing that one scorpion. It's one of the bravest times of my life, actually. But I went back with that whole experience and that further boosted confidence in mind. Returned to Detroit with all that experience and, ended up at another, well-known, well-established, notable wine space in the city of Detroit that was enjoying the hospitality renaissance that Detroit has been enjoying for the past decade now. Ladder 4 Wine Bar, and worked directly with the owner, got to build a relationship with him. And the cool thing about that space was that it was Eastern European focus, but all the most minimal of minimal intervention, borderline natty, but natty by pioneers of natty and natural winemaking. So these were people that were natural winemakers, not natty, not aspiring to be natty. And no shade to that term, however, I do feel like that term does have its own limits, whereas natural winemaking was winemaking up until the industrial age, period. And so this was a place that really had respect to the past, and I was able to learn more. However, that experience out here, being at the source and epicenter of American wine country and one of the spaces that has the pulse of the wine world on a global scale, that never left me. And so I guess 4 months after working at Ladder 4, and while at Robert Craig, they allowed us to ferment, a little Saignée rosé from their last cab, delivery, the last tonnage that we processed. And so I had, exclusive, I got a chance to make my own product. And, I sold that, at home, to friends and family. And there was such high demand where I was like, oh shit, I need to actually do this. Like, people will actually buy my wine. Like, look at this. And I was able to set, as modest, but, with respect to my craft and the work I put in, price. And that price was like gleefully accepted. And so I was like, all right, I could maybe be a winemaker. And I made a post, and someone whom I had befriended, we no longer have that relationship. And so this next part will get a little pervasive because I don't know how I feel about naming names. But I was offered an opportunity that on paper I couldn't refuse, and I was even encouraged by current friends who me and this person shared a connection to take the offer and move out here, and it involved relocation. And so it was a black woman-owned tasting room restaurant that was in Northwest. It opened in 2023. And so the dots can be connected on what that was. And it was actually on Northwest 23rd, if that helps the viewing public connect more dots without me saying names. But that opportunity was a terrible fit. I realized how much pride I had in where I had landed in the wine world, and so I had standards that I would not back down from. And this was a moment where I had to stand on business in that regard, and I was ousted essentially from that space. And I'm still recovering from that financially. It took me a while to recover from that professionally because, I was hurt, and I had never been hurt in that way professionally. You know, I was always the underdog, and I felt like punching up, but hey, being willing to reach, you know, the heights, you know, that were set in front of me. And this was a moment where I learned that a friend was not actually a friend because of business, you know, and it hurt personally, you know, because this is a person that, you know, identify with the what and the where that I'm from, or so they say, and that's shade right there. You know, but it hurt, and I'd never been hurt like that professionally, you know, and so my last aha moment, you know, led me to draw a line in the sand and say, and by the way, another one of the first wines the City Winery got me into wine was Highland Vineyards Pinot. And I, you know, recently learned that Highland Vineyards is like one of the pioneers to Oregon wine country. And, you know, it was mind blowing because I'm like, wait, it rains all the time in Oregon. How is the wine this good? Doesn't it need sun? And mind you, that was then. Over the years, and definitely due to my certification and other courses I had taken, I learned why the rain was important and, you know, what makes Oregon wine country world renowned and comparable to Burgundy, America's Burgundy. You know, and I was like, I'm here in a place that I knew I could reach out and touch because, you know, it's domestic. I'm, you know, a citizen here. I don't have to learn a new language or learn so much of a new culture to thrive in. I'm staying here and I'm doing this. And I kind of had a burning bush moment, you know, not to get too religious, and this is going to wrap it up shortly, but I lived downtown. I was relocated to one of the nice places adjacent to the Pearl. And so I would walk to the river, and I would just walk down as far as you could go, just walking the river. And at that time, not having a job for an extended period, I had lots of time to walk around and think about stuff. And so I get to this space where, you know, how the river recedes at whatever time it does. There was a nice little strip where you could like kind of cross over from the beach a little bit in the water to that strip. And so I was like, I'll do that. But I saw it from a distance, probably from where Cesar Chavez is, from where we're standing. And so I'm walking, and as I'm walking, the tide starts to get a more active. And so by the time I get there, by the time I get close enough, like within, I say 20 or 30 yards, you know, it's very muddy. And my mind tells me, nah, you probably don't want to walk there. You got on running shoes. You know, your feet are going to be stuck in the mud, and it might get hairy, because if you get stuck in the mud and the tide rises, then Willamette is a very active river. And I've been hearing stories about people being taken, you know, not having respect for the river. So I was like, okay, I'm just going to send these rocks near the beach. And I prayed, and praying to me, you know, not having a full church background, but going to one of the bigger churches in Detroit and, you know, actually believing in the teachings, you know, as far as the spiritual side, never really got with the religious side, especially when that definition was always explained there and that's what they weren't. But the spiritual side was whenever you pray, you're having a conversation with God. So I was like, all right, here we are, God, we're talking. This sucks, you know, like, but I know that you and the universe conspired to get me here for a reason, but this really, 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 really sucks. And I'm at a super low point, you know, and as I'm talking, there's ripples going towards me from the river. And I'm like, and then I'm looking, I'm like, well, wow, is the tide about to actually get to where I am on these rocks? And I'm a good 20 feet away from the river where I'm sitting. Well, I'm a good, you know, more than 10 feet away from the river where I'm sitting, where I feel is safe. But I'm like, oh, you know, I'm looking up and I'm closing my eyes, but opening, looking up. And then I just look down. I'm like, this might get dangerous. And I'm like, oh, wait, God, you're talking to me. Okay, good, here we are. And the takeaway from that, you know, my reason for sitting on those rocks, my goal was to talk to God by the water. I wanted to be in the water to make it, hey, I'm a Leo, so I'm a dramatic, so I wanted to make it a story, you know, but yet intuition told me, no, you don't have to do all that. You don't have to be so dramatic because it can get dangerous. It can defeat the purpose and put a dash on your faith being here. But sitting on the rocks, the intended outcome happened, and a bigger lesson was taught. Oh, I can have intuition. Like society says a woman's intuition, and society assigns intuition to women, especially current society, and we in all these weird ass, gender wars, but I digress. But I've realized, intuition, is greater than fear. Intuition feeds into faith, and if I follow my intuition, I do not have to be afraid. And so I was like, all right, I am here. And I had this vision shortly thereafter of purchasing land, starting my own vineyard, being totally self-sufficient, but with respect to the land, to the legacy, that was laid before me, but creating the community that I've always envisioned. I had a dream as a teenager about being in a space that I had built with all the movers and shakers that I had looked up to, making those decisions in that space. A la the founding fathers, a la, we can go back through history where there was those spaces, where the influential people got together and made world-shaping decisions. And so now I'm year 2 to a 20-year plan to establish wine country here. My own part in wine country here, and further build the community that I've been building and seeking at the same time. And so I met someone who shortly after us meeting in like late 2023 informed me of the opportunity with AVP. And I was like, look at God. I thought I was gonna need $1 gazillion to actually get started on all these things. And no, there's an opportunity right here in front of me. Now, I may not need $1 gazillion, but I might need a quarter of that, which is what I've learned. And so now it brings me to winemaking. Winemaking, this is my first time creating the product, from thin air. I'm getting my Jesus on, turning water into wine. And it is easily one of the most difficult things I've ever done in my life. Will be one of the most difficult things I've ever done in my life. My wine is not bottled, and there has been a litany of challenges due to my life outside of wine, how life's on its own, as well as the natural challenges of winemaking. However, I still believe, and I've realized that, my standards are still high, and I need to only operate within my high standards. The foundations that were created way back when are what set those standards as high as they've become. And me just flourishing thrust into moments of great challenge, that's par for the course. That's why those standards have to be where they are, because I operate at my best when, the stakes are very high. And so, again, having to learn, and still, this is only my second year in Portland. June 1st is my second anniversary of moving to Portland. And so I had to, once again, relearn a new place, a new culture, but this time without the safety net of a supportive family of in-laws or nepotism giving me one of the best wine jobs in the city. This time I've had to build from nothing. I worked at Punch Bowl Social for a few months, and great people that work there, but the space not really aligned with where I am and my experience. But it humbled me, and it showed me that, I can build myself back up, and my standards can fit in places that, will allow themselves to work towards them. They gave me a lot of space there to have my lofty standards, but people actually working to meet that instead of me having to, descend, and this is that, I remember not having any standards at all. That's why I say this so freely. I don't feel like I'm better than because of what I've developed, but I have to pay respect to all that time and all that experience. And I recommend everyone You know, always take a look back on where you came from, where you are. And if you're not happy with it, be happy with that journey. And then use that journey to look forward, you know, and realign with the goal, the pie in the sky, whatever it is. You know, like you taking these first steps, you had first steps before. And so whenever these subsequent steps get, you know, seemingly impossible, remember you started way further back. And so if you got to the point you are now, that means that the next couple of steps, once you pass those, you'll be way higher than you thought you would be, you know, and that's life. And that's life, as I see it.
Amazing. Okay, you talked earlier about wanting to make the space better for the people who came behind you. So tell me about, as part of your 20-year plan, what would you like to do? How would you like to be involved in making the wine space more inclusive, more everything?
I want to teach the youth. I feel like that's something that's always been lacking in American culture in regards to the wine industry. Even to this day, you go to France, Italy, Spain, all the other celebrated old worlds, and they had their kids running through the vineyards. And people have a reference for wine from a very young age. You know, my fellow intern, he was from Verona, you know, Valpolicella land, and he's a fourth generation grape grower, second generation winemaker, you know, and he learned how to drive a forklift at 16. You know, he was out in the vineyards from when he could walk and talk back to his parents, you know, and I'm like, okay, and I come from a huge family, you know, my mother and father's side, you know, tons of siblings, so now there's tons of nieces and nephews, because I have a bunch of siblings and younger cousins, and I'm like, all right, it took me stumbling into this in my mid-20s after, I didn't even talk about what, you know, from graduating high school to the mid-20s, living in Detroit. I'm very fortunate to be here based on experiences I've had. And I have a nephew that's 16. He can subvert all those experiences that could have led me to not being on this earth. You know, and there's a series of them. He can subvert all of that and at the very least get in bigger trouble. You know, like, I'd rather him be an international man, you know, an international man where it's like, oh, you know, I took the prince's, you know, betrothed, and so now the country's after me. It's like, oh, well, all right, well, cool. Just come over here. You know, I got land. I got somewhere to put you up. You can't say nothing for 2 years, but after that, you can do whatever you want again, you know. I'd rather that trouble than be caught, you know, than be caught in the wrong place at the wrong time just because of who you are and how you look, you know, which happens way too often. You know, and that's a totally different story, which we all know, but this is my part in preventing that.
And your shirt says, "Thank you, Black winemakers." Want to make sure we point that out. And I was also going to ask about your tattoos, if you have time to share about your tattoos before we let you go.
Most of them are fun. This, funny story with this is my late father's nickname, Mr. Done Deal. He was a used car salesman in Detroit, but became a legend in his own right as such. And that, you know, that was his tag, it's Done Deal. And that's what people called him, Mr. Done Deal. And so, you know, as I said, we were very close. And after I moved to New York, you know, this was like a year after he passed and going through all that depression. And so I got, you know, his birthday is Father's Day weekend, basically. And so that Father's Day weekend, I was just really going through it emotionally and got real drunk out with one of my friends and decided at 4 o'clock in the morning, I want to get a tattoo. What should I get? Oh, it's my father's birthday. I'm gonna get his nickname in these letters from the 80s rock band, who he might have been a fan of. Slayer, yes. Yeah. But, you know, I woke up the next day hungover and my arm all wrapped up and I'm like, what the fuck is this? And of course it reads down, you know, as someone reading it would see. And so I can't read it. I'm like, what is this? So I take the wrap off and then I recognize Mr. And I'm like, oh, and then there's a picture as well of me asleep in the chair getting this tattoo. which I have is in my Google Photos archive. But yeah, so yeah, this has by far the most meaning. Then my newest tattoo on my calf, at ladder 4, there was a Piemonte's producer's bottle that had Bacchus. Yes. Picture of baby Bacchus on the label. And so we all decided it'd be a fun idea to get matching tattoos of baby Bacchus. And so we had respected tattoo artists come to the job. It was the day it was closed. Come to the job. We opened some wine bottles. The chef cooked because he got the tattoo as well. And about 6 of us got these matching tattoos. And so,
love it.
And then the other ones, this was cheap. This was Detroit tattoo. You got it. If you're from Detroit, you got to get at least one Detroit tattoo. Leos are proud to be Leos and love telling people. So this is the Leo tattoo here. And this, perseverance, very important word in my life. And then this one, yeah, like I said, cheap tattoo. I'm in a fraternity, so I have brands as well. This is kind of a fraternity tattoo from my place in line. But it was only $25, and so yeah, like, I had to think of something fast. And so yeah.
My name is Rich Schmidt. We're back here with Randall Coats for part 2. It's August 5th, 2025. We're back at Laurelhurst Park in Portland. Randall, thanks for joining us again. We appreciate it. So to go back to kind of the first time we spoke, you mentioned obviously kind of getting your start. City Winery was kind of a big spot for you. So tell us a little bit more about City Winery, what it is, and what kind of your role was there, and the kind of lessons you learned. What did you do, and what did you take away from there?
So City Winery is a music venue primarily, but you know, its name is an actual fully functioning winery in what's known as the city. No shade to San Francisco, but Manhattan on the East Coast is known as the city, you know, in New York City. And yeah, like the theme is a fully functioning winery that doubles as a music venue. And yeah, my connection there is through my grandmother, Betty Levette, is her name. She is known as a song interpreter, but she got her start in the Motown era in the 60s and stayed consistent through the waves of the music business. Had a resurgence in the early 2000s, and that brought her back to a level of consistency in the industry, recording and performing still. And I'm actually her road manager. I moonlight as her road manager.
Sweet. So what did you do there? What was your role at City Winery?
So I was hired there as a server with no knowledge of wine outside of understanding that champagne was its own thing due to the lawsuit. And I didn't understand the history of that, and that there's a difference between red, white, and rosé wines based on color. But yeah, that was my foundation, that was my base. I went from knowing nothing to learning a lot in what I say a little bit of time. Just, you know, looking at all that was, I guess, absorbed, you know, in my start. But not even believing that there was a need for wine, especially expensive wine. Not considering the history and its influence on culture. But shortly after my aha moment, which was a glass, as I mentioned before, of Malbec on tap, I, you know, really found myself becoming immersed in obtaining, you know, knowledge of the processes involved, the history, and its influence on culture.
So tell me about taking that interest and learning it from a perspective of understanding wine and selling wine. What did you have to know in order to sell wine? What did customers want to know? What did they want to hear from you?
They wanted to know how I felt about the wine I was selling. And so kids, you don't need knowledge to sell wine. You just need to be comfortable expressing yourself. And that's what came first. You know, I had that aha moment, and I was sharing that with everybody that would listen. And fortunately, the paying customers listen a lot. And so there were points where everybody in my section was having Metro Malbec. And I didn't know that there were so many different, maybe even considered greater options out there. I just really sold my experience and expressed how it made me feel, and it worked. And that expression, I guess, allowed the people who were my leaders professionally and my first teachers to let me into learning more of the world, the larger wine world.
So from there, tell me about building a wine list. What was the first time you built a wine list, and how did you do it?
First time I built a wine list was in Stavanger, Norway. It's on the west side of the country. Just a really amazing experience where I was helping a Norwegian retiree at the time kind of live out his dream of opening a Turkish-style cafe, and then adding a full wine program as a component. And this was through an incubator program there in the town that we were connected. And one of the leaders of said program had deep experience in the beverage industry. And so he essentially trained me on how to build a beverage list and you know, assisted me with making connections. And I was able to make some of my own connections. As I may have mentioned, my WSET 2 instructor was my primary supplier. And so got some real great hands-on outside of the classroom training. But yeah, they really gave me the principles in developing an approachable wine list, and like a wine list that, a beginner's wine list. You know, just meeting all the specific marks, and I've been able to use that basis to build on and apply in a lot of different settings.
So let's talk about that a little bit. Tell me about what are the basics, and as you've built on it, what have you liked? What have you added? What has been important to you to make sure wine list represents?
So the basics is having a balanced list. You know, balance as far as the different types of wine, the different styles, and for example, light to full body. And if there's, you know, a dedicated food program, making sure everything pairs decently at least. And you know, there's principles with that, but making sure everything pairs with the food options. And I was able to build after learning the myriad of options that were out there, and really speaking to the highlights of the food menu in conjunction with keeping it approachable. You know, like, hey, it's great to sell DRC, you know, Burgundy. It's great, but that's an extremely expensive option that the majority of a customer base is looking for approachable cannot afford. So find different ways to, you know, meet that level of quality or even approach that level of quality, but keep it, you know, in an accessible realm. And so, yeah, once again, balance, you know, just finding different ways to strike balance, you know, considering all the factors at play.
So with the Norway project specifically, you talked about kind of the, like you say, kind of the dream of someone else, and you're hired in to kind of build the list and help him kind of realize this. So tell me about that first list and about your experience there. What was it like to sell wine there? What was it like to get the project off the ground?
It was an awesome learning experience, and one of the formative experiences that brought me to the point I am today. You know, the gentleman whose dream it was I was helping realize had no background in wine. His focus was, you know, beer. He was a big fan of old world beers, Belgian, Eastern Europe, German. And so I wanted to, you know, keeping that in mind, still making it so it was understandable, digestible and approachable for him, you know, as the owner of the establishment, you know, and understanding the market in a place that I had never been. So I definitely got an understanding of Norwegians' love for Chablis and Valpolicella, which, you know, those are two specifics that you come to know as you progress in the wine world, but understanding that, yeah, every country has its focus and its nuance. You know, every market has its focus and its nuance. And so it was a lesson in that. It's difficult opening a new space, especially with lacking experience in the realm of which you're opening that new space. You know, myself and one of the leaders in the incubator program were bringing that experience to a person that had very little outside of being a consumer. And so we all had to take our licks. And there were some unfortunate moments, you know, where changes were made in that opening team, and myself and the owner, we had to step up in ways that we hadn't before. And that's a learning process on its own. You know, it's like going from a chef to a mechanic is not going to be easy. You know, you can apply some principles, but the actual process itself requires the work that it takes. In addition to, you know, balancing our personal lives, which in that moment, being involved in a marriage that required the level of work that I, you know, unfortunately wasn't prepared for, and really caused my need to leave the position as well as the country. You know, but I learned from all of that, and I'm still taking lessons. I'm still learning new lessons from that moment today. And, you know, and I think that's a part of the journey, being able to reflect on past moments and still take new lessons from whatever moment in the past you had.
So after coming back, you obviously eventually got to Napa to do an internship. We talked a little bit about this last time, but I'm curious about, after being kind of immersed in wine from the consumer side, from the somm side, from the sales side, what was it like to be in the production side? What were you expecting out of that experience, and what were the big takeaways or impacts?
I kept my expectations to a minimum. I knew it was an isolated experience where I would either love it or hate it and decide my direction from that point. But it was eye-opening, just being able to see how everything, as far as winemaking and you know, the industry from a production side, that start being in the vineyard, you know, working side by side with people not focused on the service experience, but focused on the science and the production, and getting an understanding of them. You know, it was like, you know, being in the mind and the shoes of a winemaker, of a scientist, you know, because the people I worked with had high level degrees that were more focused on science as opposed to expression, you know, and experience. And so, yeah, it helped, I guess, sharpen my scientific mind and gain a greater appreciation for the actual science behind producing wine, which is, yeah, older than the service. You know, yeah, people were making wine out of their backyard and welcoming friends over before you went to a fancy restaurant and spent, you know,
a lot of money.
Sums of money, you know, per glass or per bottle. You know, and furthermore, the level of passion required, you know, production in any industry is never glorious. It's, you know, mostly thankless. Like, these people were producing for people that they would never see, never get to reach out and touch or, you know, share an interaction or experience. You know, but still maintain the same level of passion that I did for people that I was regularly interacting with and providing an experience for and gaining an experience myself. You know, and so I think it definitely made me more rounded. It showed me it gave me a better outlook on the industry, because seeing it from the supplier side, I think is second to none. You know, like, yeah, there's the fun experiences, you know, when you're on premise, you know, where you're at the events. There's the big money, you know, being in the distributor realm, the sales realm, but the purity of creating a product, you know, that's one of the oldest human experiences in regards to producing, period. Before there was commerce, before there was a dollar, there was production, you know, and so I got to tap into that like very, very old, you know, and legendary world. Yeah, and my experience being a part of such a small team was amazing. You know, I was in a community of people that were at different levels as far as being interns. Some people just did punch downs and pump overs. Some people just did cleaning. Others were as involved as I was at the time, or even more involved based on having prior experience. You know, and also considering I was the only formally educated person as a part of that team. Everybody on that team was formally educated in production or had a background in science. There was it was a University of Bordeaux graduate, two University of Bordeaux graduates, UC Davis graduate, and then a person that was, you know, kind of positioning themselves to take that route to a UC Davis, a University of Bordeaux. And me, I don't even have a college degree. You know, just a ton of very valuable experience, you know, but I was able to learn from that group, as was my very beginning, you know, being the totally unknowledgeable, inexperienced, being able to learn and glean from a ton of experience immediately around me.
So you mentioned that being kind of a love it or hate it kind of moment. So tell me, coming out of that harvest, what did you think about your own future in production? Was it something you had to do, something you thought you might do? What was kind of the production future for you in your mind at that point?
I figured I had the best understanding that I would ever have of creating my own product. And I had the option to continue pursuing internships and being at various levels and learning different styles, you know, or this was just fortunate coming across AVP, being able to make that choice to like step out and start my own, but still with the intent of learning and understanding that it's an ongoing learning process, you know. But I feel like I was given a lot in a beginner's position, and it gave me the confidence, which just give me a little bit of confidence. I'll take it a long way, make that step, and to start my own label. As maybe ill-advised as that could have been, you know, confidence is always key, and it's you know, definitely been a big part of where I am today in this realm.
So you mentioned being in Portland and finding out about AVP. So tell me about how you heard about it and what the thought process was for you, and then what was the actual application process. You hear about this idea, this incubator program. What's your first thought, and how do you go about applying for it?
So if a friend told me about it. We were both newcomers to Portland and had similar experiences, especially as far as the challenges. And so I shared the vision, you know, that I had for myself, and they mentioned that the AVP was doing the incubator program and encouraged me to apply. And I was like, I offered, you know, my negativity, for lack of a better word, you know, my hesitance, you know, towards it, and they were like, well, just apply anyway, you know, believe in yourself, you have the confidence, you can do it. And so the application was put out, this was spring 2024. I applied, I got an initial communication that, you know, I was accepted for an interview, had a great video interview, actually on Zoom while I was in Detroit visiting a family member that was under concerning health at the hospital. But I put it out there, and you know, I really let my passion run wild, and just say that, you know, I believe that this is something that I can do. And so I was accepted. You know, I've been told that there wasn't a huge field of applicants as competition. So maybe there was a little serendipity with that. But I was accepted, and I got my acceptance while in Europe for a tour. My grandmother was touring in Europe. I spent 2 weeks there. And we were in London, and this was 90 minutes before she was on stage. I got the email saying I was accepted. And so we had our moment, you know, we had a toast of champagne, did our crying, and then she had to get her makeup on. I had to straighten up and get her on stage. And so I came back, you know, pretty much with the plan ahead of me. And yeah, went from there. And this was the whole process from submitting an application to getting accepted was about a month.
So what was your plan? What did you think I know it's a multi-year process with AVP, so tell me about what was your initial plan, and what was important to you about the first year, the first step?
My initial plan was to, you know, go as artisan as I thought I had learned, or I felt I had learned. And apply all the minimal intervention principles that I come to enjoy and sell on a regular basis to my own products. And continue building incrementally to just be at the highest level of boutique I could be. Never have a large team, never be large-scale production. Like, still, I only aspire to do, you know, 5,000 cases, and I mean, that's at the furthest of my aspirations. But if I can do what I feel, if I can accomplish what I like to with less, I would. You know, if it's 1,000 cases, 2,000 cases, you know, and the reason why I want the volume to be in the thousands, just to be able to have enough inventory to reach as many markets as I would like, domestically and internationally.
So obviously it's pretty kind of late in the season to get started. Summer of 24, you got harvest coming right up. You got to kind of figure out all of the details. So tell me about finding grapes and figuring out what you want to do first year.
So AVP, like the incubator program, they provided us with recommendations, you know, and kind of steered us, you know, after some tasting sessions and, you know, just asking us, you know, what we aspire to. And so I used my knowledge and experience of Willamette Valley, you know, where it was, in addition to their recommendations, to make some quick decisions that I felt comfortable with at the time. And you know, the production is very limited. You know, the program encompassed, you know, producing 2 tons of grapes, you know, which is about 1,000 bottles. Maybe my math is bad, but a very limited production. Yeah, it was 1,000-ish bottles, about 500 cases. No, 100 cases of about 1,000-ish bottles. Yeah, so about 100 cases. But you know, limited just to get your start. And so I was like, okay, I can push for artisan, you know, and possibly not break the bank, which my bank is so broken from this experience. But at least, you know, have an outlook on the future, you know, from the first harvest. But just a good start. And so, yeah, we'll move forward from there.
What were the highlights of the first vintage? for you personally, either the wine itself or just were there moments that stood out to you?
Receiving, the 2 tons, the beginning stages of processing. It was surreal in the sense of having sold people's product for so long and having heard so many stories and even working under someone, leading production to that moment for yourself, and then taking the initial steps.
So at the end of the process for you, as you approach second year, what were the biggest takeaways for you, and what do you want to do better this year?
The biggest takeaway is accepting that there will be hitches that could be critical to your process, but you have to remain consistent through all the challenges, which for a first timer, I've learned that is extremely difficult. And I think my expectations were too high for myself. And so going forward, scaling back those expectations and really starting from a simpler perspective. I decided to try my hand in making a red wine and white wine because I was inspired by the red wines that have been made, the red grapes, the black grapes that have been made into white wines here. I tried my hand with doing that with Cabernet Franc, not taking into consideration the biology of the grape itself, and how that would influence the process. And so I think I put myself in a position where I was trying to reinvent the wheel. And from experience, I'm sure you've been doing what you've been doing for quite some time, you know that reinventing the wheel is never the best idea. And so I will not try and reinvent the wheel as best I can help it. If I'm befallen, a lot of disposable income, I'll try it again for shits and giggles. But my expectations will be minimum even with that. And so, I won't be, doing harvest this year. And I want to take a break to pay who I owe, namely, as well as give myself a better start. I think I jumped into it, throwing caution to the wind. And this time, I'm going to ride the wind with caution. Or the next time, I'm going to, flow with the wind with caution in mind. And I think that's always the best way. That adage of the only, how do you make $1 million in the wine business? You start with $1 million.
Or 2 or 5 or 10.
Or 2 or 5, at least $1 million, that rings true in its own way, not to, discredit or discourage myself, but just being real about it, and being pragmatic, about approaching the process and moving forward.
So let's talk about a little bigger picture here for a second. You mentioned kind of early stages of a long-term plan for yourself. Tell me about long-term. What role would you like to play in the Oregon wine industry? What would you like your impact to be?
I'd like to be a major player, a known player, to just have the influence, to be able to share my story, in a variety of ways and as broad as possible, using products, to encourage, those that have had moments where they felt like the wine world was not for them. And again, being a non-traditional wine consumer based on what history, and a series of data sets have shown to be traditional consumers, showing them that there is space. There's established space that is set and held for them. And, hopefully in accessing that space, seeing the wide spectrum of opportunity that comes with being in that space. And, you know, in the previous interview I mentioned, you know, having nieces and nephews whom I feel like I've opened doors for. And yeah, I would like for them to make much bigger mistakes than me and my siblings, their parents, you know, made in our formative years and our early adulthood. You know, them taking on much broader challenges than what we were faced ourselves and what we, you know, ultimately limited ourselves to. I don't want them to, you know, start their journey with those same limits.
All right, fantastic. All the stuff I wanted to talk about today. Anything else come to mind that we didn't talk about in either interview?
I don't think so.
Thank you so much for making this happen a second time and following up with us. Appreciate it. And we're going to let you off the hook one more time. Thank you, Randall.
Thank you.